Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation With. I'm Craig Carolan from Intrinsic Education, and we are once again very, very lucky to have a special guest who's going to be talking to us a little bit about what they're doing in the education space at the moment, and we know how important that is. So a warm welcome to Trevor Harbottle, the principal of Hermannsburg School. Trevor, great to have you on board.
Thank you, Craig. Lovely to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
An absolute pleasure. And I know you're doing such wonderful work around this space and what's a very, very important time at the moment. And obviously, as people know, what we talk about here is really the human impact of what we're doing. So we're really looking forward to hearing what it is that you are doing. Just to give you some background, folks, Trevor and I have been working together for quite a while in the positive education space. And I'm actually going to ask him a little later to talk about that. Trevor, I think really interesting. Our topic today is going to be focused, although we will talk about positive education. Our topic today is actually focused around some work that you guys are doing around developing a program for a socio-emotional response for both your students and for your staff when you guys come out of lockdown. So, and I think what's really pleasing is the fact that although it was a 50-page document, there was an element in there, the one that was produced yesterday by the Department of Education. It was really pleasing to see that they've also included an element of, I think they called it their psychosocial response to this. And I think it's critical that this human side of things is being addressed. So hopefully we'll see a lot of it. I think it's going to be probably more critical than the other aspects of it. So Trevor, I think first of all, so that our guests can get to know you a little bit, tell us a little bit about tell us about Hermannsburg School. Let's start there and then we take it from there.
So Hermannsburg School is quite a small school, which makes us quite unique and agile in terms of being able to introduce sort of positive education, a socio-emotional support thing, because we're looking at, in the high school, 78 scholars, 16 teachers. If I look at the whole school from the preschool, our quadruple R's all the way through to grade 12, I've got 170 children and I've got 40 academic and admin staff. So it's very small. Our biggest class in any grade in the school is 22 children, and some of our classes are only 5 children. Wow. So it is a very personal, very caring school just because of those size aspects. You really know everybody. There's no place for any child to hide. And it's very easy to pick up quite quickly if there are emotional needs or if there is acting out that's happening, because it's not somebody who's lost in the middle of a big crowd. And I think that's a lot of what has sort of driven our thought around this, is because we know a lot of our children quite deeply and quite personally. We know the child who's at home having to look after their 3 children, and mom is unemployed at the moment, and they're in that kind of a situation. And so we're aware that they're going to come back to school having experienced things that not all of us have had to experience, and that's going to have an impact on their ability to learn, to catch up work, and to cope with things. And so I think that's a lot of the reason that we've been looking for answers and for ways in which we can approach and support those kind of scholars.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Trevor. I think, you guys are very, with the makeup of your school, I think there are a lot of similarities to what you face, although you're an independent school. There are a lot of similarities to many of the government schools in terms of the nature of what your families are having to deal with in this lockdown. Trevor, I think another good starting point for us, and we know we've heard a little bit now about Hermannsburg. Tell me how you came across positive education and why that was so appealing to you as the head of a school.
So I think probably like a lot of teachers, I went into teaching because I wanted to see lives impacted. For me, it's about seeing people grow. That's really what I wanted to see. And that's part of the reason that I've moved into managing a school and being principal of a school, is because my feeling was there's greater impact that can be had when you are leading and growing your staff and your scholars than just being in a classroom. So for me, that was part of my personal purpose there. And I've always thought that character development and character growth was an essential thing to focus on, and not to keep it hidden in the background, but to actually be quite intentional about it. But I've never, I guess, had a full armory of tools for how to deal with it. It was always the case of I was working with intuition, and I'd come across sort of something here or something there in readings I would do, and oh, that will work well. But last year, about reflection and about bringing some character education into the class. And out of the discussions that we had then, I did a bit more reading. And one of the things that I was reading was the Trivium. It was a book that you recommended to us. And from that, I can't remember exactly how, but there were a few links from there that took me towards positive psychology and positive education. And around the same time, St. Andrew's School in Grahamstown, with Alan Thompson and Craig Carolan, introduced a positive education conference, which they invited schools to be part of. And because it was something that I was really looking at deeply, my board was very supportive, and I was able to go down myself. I remember that, talking to you a little bit at the conference about how we could take some of what we'd learned at the conference and look at then introducing it into Hermannsburg as a whole school model, and as a tool that we could develop, and a sort of very contextual, but moving in the same direction, rather than just a few of us who felt really engaged in this, but know that it was something that was embedded in the school.
Yeah. So once once you had obviously been to the conference, and you'd obviously been introduced, and obviously as you've mentioned, I was there, and we had that conversation. We started exploring exactly what that would look like at Hermannsburg. And do you want to elaborate a little bit on exactly where the journey then took you and what you have done so far? Because of course that will lead very nicely into us talking about the work that you're doing at the moment, around trying to prepare your school for when we come back out of lockdown.
No, so I think that for us, the starting point was we needed to get all of the staff in the school to understand what is positive education and why do we see benefit in it. So I did a bit of a staff development with my staff at the beginning of the year to introduce that, and we made our theme as a staff for this year, Live Well, Learn Well, based on the sort of well-being aspects that come out of positive education. And at the same time, in our conversations, we decided we would use the PERMA model that Martin Seligman had developed, and we would sort of look at how we could make that real for our school and for what our teachers are dealing with. And so with your sort of support coming in every month to do some development with us, we then looked at the positive emotions aspect, and really behind that, what we were trying to achieve was to get I think maybe a common language that all of the staff are talking, and that we say, these are the key areas that we are focusing on in our school, and these are the emotions that we want to see displayed amongst our scholars and amongst our staff. And really the reason we're starting with the staff is if the staff all buy into the concept of positive education, of wellness, and understand the importance of creating emotionally stable scholars, that will be a better foundation for academic development than having emotionally distracted scholars who are not able to focus on the academics. So the teacher could be doing a great job, but the kids are busy dealing with all sorts of trauma, grief, anxiety from their home life, and they're not able to really focus on it. And so I think that's sort of the point where we are at the moment, is starting to understand now what are some of the key positive emotions that we are wanting to work on as a staff. And I think some of the biggest ones that have come through for us are really that we want to be a very caring community. That's something that has come through strongly. And so if I'm asking myself that question, how are we a caring community? How do we as a school care for our staff, and how do we care for our scholars? It wasn't a big leap to start looking at how do we respond to this coronavirus shutdown, and how do we then sort of provide some way of supporting everybody, for it then to be looking at, we need to be doing a lot in this emotional space, we are really going to be able to reconnect with our scholars in terms of the academic side of work, to expect them to come back after somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks away from school. Some of that's remote learning, there's anxiety. And so that's really what we are sort of looking at the moment in terms of how do we deal with this and resolve that.
Yeah. Trevor, I think it's probably a good time for me to jump in for those folk who are listening and aren't aware. You spoke about the PERMA model that we've been introducing at Hermannsburg, and to give those of you who are listening and who don't know the model just a little framework. So the PERMA stands for the positive emotions that we are trying to engage with, and what the work we've done at Hermannsburg is to collectively, as a group, as a staff, to try and identify the key positive emotions that we are trying to build in our students, and of course for us to be role models of that. And it's things like gratitude. I think that one came out quite strongly in terms of the community. So there's that, and then to the idea is once we are aware of positive emotions, to kind of broaden and build those within our community. The second, the E stands for engagement. How are we engaging in activity with our students? And we obviously are looking at ways that we can be quite explicit about how we engage with our students. R is about positive relationships, and of course, I think it's a great strength of Hermannsburg in that you pride yourselves on the community. And I think this one comes naturally to you as a school. And again, your response here, the socio-emotional response, shows that how, the priority that you place on that. So R stands for relationships, building those, and it's kind of the human system that we're trying to strengthen. M is for meaning, and creating meaning within the things that we do. We've spoken a lot. I'm just going to use the academic model that we've spoken about. We have the Triflect model, where we are trying to get our teachers to be very explicit about what it is and why they are teaching things. So, if you're going to teach a topic, to actually, first of all, engage with the meaning of why this is important to the students, because of course, if there's meaning, then we heighten the levels of intrinsic motivation. And then A is achievement, and creating a framework where our students can experience these ongoing kind of mini achievements. And of course, that builds self-confidence, and it becomes a really positive spiral. And then the last one, which we've added in the end, is that the piece around vitality, which of course James is doing quite a lot of work on. And the V is vitality and well-being. So we're trying to look at how we can build that in the school. So there's the PERMA model that Hermannsburg are using. And of course, that leads us very nicely onto the socio-emotional response that you built. Tell us a little bit about, you've told us now what planted the seed and the background of positive ed leading into this. Where are you at with that at the moment, Trevor?
So what we did is we're fortunate to have a chaplain on our staff. And so the chaplain, myself, we then involved you, and I happen to know a social worker up in Johannesburg with a master's and a background in trauma and grief and anxiety. So we asked her to consult us as well. And we've had a couple of discussions around how do we deal with some of the negative emotions that children might have been feeling at home, that anxiety, that grief, that trauma. Got some very useful materials that we've able to sort of look at and do with our staff. And the approach is that we need to help our staff understand, first of all, the sort of our human brain and how that's wired and how that reacts to these different things, and how it is very similar for anxiety, for grief, for trauma, whatever they've been through, and how they will respond. And so I've actually already had a staff development discussion with our staff around the fights and the frights, and then around the sort of freeze, and how we need to be able to start acknowledging and understanding that for ourselves, and then being able to look at that in our scholars and the rest of the community. And so our plan is to we're only looking at coming back to school around the 18th of May, possibly later, depending on what the department decides, and then obviously using our flexibility as an independent school. And we will definitely have a week with our staff where we can do training with them prior to the scholars coming back to school. That's already been communicated to our parent community. So whenever children are allowed to come back, the staff will come back a week before that with that purpose in mind. And then the first 2 days of our, when we are back at school, we've set aside the first 3 hours of each morning for us to have small group discussions around what children have experienced while they've been on shutdown, what their thoughts have been about it, what emotions that they've been through. We've got a few of the staff who are more emotionally attuned to that and who will sort of guide those. And we're also looking at getting in a couple of experts from outside who can provide more intensive counseling and support where we pick up larger problems than we as teachers are able to deal with. And so those will be the first 2 full mornings for that. On the Wednesday, every class from grade 4 to grade 12 will have a 40-minute session with our school chaplain so that he is able to sort of, I guess, round off and finish off the debrief that will have happened in the first 2 days. And then thereafter, there will be sort of a longer-term program in place to respond to some of the discussion topics that are brought up by the children in those initial days and the responses from staff. So that's sort of the structure that we are looking at. There's still a few details that we're having to go through and that we are looking at around it, but that's the sort of basic core of how we are going to approach this.
That's brilliant. So if I'm right in saying, so you're going to bring the staff back in effect to skill them up in terms of, I suppose, first an understanding of where they are and how, because I imagine, we know this, our teachers are also, in a very heightened state of anxiety, and they've been working exceptionally hard. Most of them are families. So not only are they trying to provide work and teach other students, but they're having to look after their own families and their well-being at the same time. So I guess it's a great exercise in them developing strategies to cope with their own anxiety and then to role model and to help the students once they come back. Am I right in saying that's what you're trying to do?
Correct. That's exactly what we are hoping that we can achieve with the staff. So that's the intention in that first week, is that, like we plan for the staff, for the scholars, the first couple of days with staff will be essentially a debrief with them and looking at what have they faced, what have they experienced, how have they coped, giving them some sort of knowledge foundations to help them understand everything, and then being able to, after the first probably 3 days are done, start looking in the last couple of days, how do we now take what we've experienced and learned and coped with and translate that across to our scholars. And I think part of what is with that is we've done a couple of surveys with our staff. The first one was a couple of weeks ago, just after Easter, about where are our staff at the moment in terms of the academic approach, but also just in terms of their own sort of mental and emotional state. There's another survey going out to our staff today, actually, looking at their physical and emotional state that they are in prior to coming back to school, so that we can also try and be informed of the best way that we can then support them going forward. Because I think if our staff don't feel supported and aren't in a good space, they're not going to be able to support our scholars. So we have to start there and work from that base.
Yeah, and I think, we obviously want to be clear to folk that the academic side of things is obviously really important, but of course, more importantly, if we aren't able to get our students into the right frame of mind and our teachers into the right frame of mind to teach, I guess we're not going to be able to be impactful in our academic teaching in any case. So this kind of comes first, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things we've been saying, we've had remote learning in place since the shutdown. We sent on worksheet packs and we've had online classes, etc. But we've emphasized in the discussions with the staff that I've had that I want to see connection over content. And for me, my feeling is that with this lockdown, our scholars need to know that the teachers care about them, that the relationships are intact. And if they return to school and the relational bonds between staff members and scholars have actually been deepened, I think we'll be able to catch up any content gaps that have emerged. But if they return to school and there is a breakdown in the relationship between staff and scholars, and the focus is entirely on, we've got a lot of pressure, we've got to catch up on academics, I think I'll end up with a very frustrated staff and scholar sort of mix, and probably achieve less in the time that we make available than if we take a little bit of time out to deal with that emotional thing and to prioritize that relationship. So yeah, it's not always easy and it doesn't always work perfectly, but I think it's about looking at long-term, what are we trying to achieve and what can we do to make sure that we achieve that, rather than just looking short-term, we've missed academic time and we need to fix that, and trying to look at that whole human and how do we support them. That's
absolutely brilliant, Trevor. I think there'll be a lot of people who are listening to this talk and be going, oh my word, that is so right. And I agree 100%, as you know, and hence hence you being invited onto this conversation, because I think it's a very powerful message that you send as a principal, first of all, because I think you're the person who embraces this more than most, and I think it's easy for you're a great role model to your teachers and of course then to the students. One thing that I in a conversation we had earlier, one of the things that also came out that I think is very powerful that you've done. Tell us a little bit about the letter that you've sent out. I know most of our heads are sending out letters, but it wasn't about the letter, the information we shared that was important. It was actually why you sent the letter. So do you want to elaborate on exactly your thinking behind the letter you sent out recently to your parents?
Yeah, so I sent out a letter on Tuesday about when we were looking at reopening and what, mechanisms we would have in place when we did reopen to ensure the safety of our scholars and of our staff. And the reasoning behind it was actually came from a leadership strategy Zoom call that took place the previous week. One of the things that really stood out for me from there is he said, as leaders, we can't provide certainty in this kind of crisis and scenario, but we can provide clarity. And that really resonated with me, because I'd been looking for myself, how can I give everybody certainty about things? And I was battling to do that. And that was really one of those light bulbs of clarity I can give. And so I knew that the Minister of Education and the Department of Education would be putting out information this week. And I wanted to help our school community to know if they're confused about all of that information, they can know that as a school, we have a plan for them and they can feel secure within our plan. Again, our plan isn't saying exactly what's going to happen, but it's giving them as much clarity as we can about what will be happening. And so that was really the intention, is to create clarity in an uncertain space.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know obviously Grant Ashfield's the work that he presented in that webinar was very powerful, and it spoke about the 4 disciplines, and the first discipline being building a cohesive leadership team, and then pretty much the other 3 disciplines were all around that idea of creating clarity, over communicating, which is about creating even more clarity, and then reinforcing clarity, and what the mechanisms were under that. And I think this letter that you've sent out, rightly so. I mean, we're seeing it on social media, the not knowing because of the mixed messages that have been sent, unwittingly, and we're all well intended. We know that, and the government, of course, is well intended. The mixed messages that are going out have actually created higher levels of anxiety about this knowing, and I think I love that message that you share about, yes, there isn't certainty. We can't create certainty by the nature of this pandemic, but actually what you can do is create clarity around what it is you're doing as a school. And I think that's a very powerful message. That if there's one thing to take, if you only take one thing out of this conversation, that's it. I'd hope people will take a lot more out of it, because I personally, doing the PERMA model with you, and being engaged in the work that Grant Ashfield does around healthy organizations, Pat Lencioni's work is I think that's what you guys are doing is wonderful. And so, Trevor, I think we're going to draw to a close there. I'm aware that trying not to go too long so that folks don't have too much to mull over, but it has been really helpful, hearing you talk about what it is that you guys are doing as a school. I think it's wonderful the work that Hermannsburg are doing, that you are driving at your school, that you are leading. So, and I certainly hope I know that there will be a lot of other schools who will take certain pieces of this and try and put it into what it is that they're doing. So a great message for leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, just a massive thank you from all of us to Trevor Harbottle and Hermannsburg School for joining us in today's In Conversation With. I know you will have enjoyed it. So I look forward to hearing someone else speak next week. We haven't decided on who it's going to be, but I think with coronavirus around, I think it's probably going to be something in the lines of education, much like Trevor spoke about today. So hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe, everyone. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us.